Hello and good morning or good afternoon to everyone in the meeting. This is Sterling speaking from Moncito. I just want to start off and say thank you everyone for joining today's call. We're going to wait just another couple minutes to let some other folks trickle on in, and we'll go ahead and begin. Just to let everybody know, there is a Q&A chat function towards the bottom. So if anyone does have any questions as we move along through the webinar here today, please feel free to type in your questions. We will take a moment or towards the end to actually get everything answered for everybody. So thanks again. I will chime back in another minute or two and let some of the rest of the folks here log on in. All right. Hello, everyone. Once again, Sterling here from Moncito. If you are just now logging in, welcome to the Moncito and Common Look 10 document accessibility errors you can fix now webinar. We appreciate all of you taking some time, whether still in the morning for you or later in the afternoon. Thank you all for joining the call. We will be starting here in just a minute or two. We'll let some of the rest of the folks here get logged in. If you are wondering if you want to ask any questions as we move today's webinar, there is a Q&A section for anybody you will be on mute, so won't be able to speak directly, though we will address any of the questions into the chat feature towards the end of the session. And then if you are having any Zoom issues, please let us know in the chat function as well. We do have some support staff here to help you get going. Aside from that, we are going to hand it off to Paul here in just a second. And we will begin with Paul Reyes, who is the Common Look training liaison. And then we also have Chad here from Common Look as well. We'll talk to you more about some routes to get assistance with your PDFs at the end of the call. But aside from that, I will hand it off to Paul and let him take it away.
Thanks, Sterling. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I did notice, by the way, in the chat that there was a question, will this be captioned? While today's webinar is not being captioned, we will be able to send a captioned recording of the presentation to you. So please be on the lookout for that. As Sterling mentioned, if you're having technical issues with Zoom, please feel free to drop those into the chat pod and put your more technical, maybe document, maybe website accessibility, Moncito, Common Look questions, put those into the Q&A pod, and we will get those at the end. So as Sterling mentioned, thanks for joining in. Today we're going to talk about 10 things that you can fix in your documents relatively quickly and easily. But first, we'll begin with just a quick conversation about accessibility. Make sure we're all on the same page with what it is and what we have to do about it and why and so on. Then get into the 10 things that we can address quickly and easily. And then we'll also talk about how Moncito and Common Look can help you fix issues that maybe expose issues that you weren't aware about with testing, and then how to get those issues fixed as well. And of course, as we mentioned, we'll open up to questions and we'll provide some contact information for you as well. So when it comes to accessibility, it's important to first be on the same page with what we're talking about. I was at a healthcare convention one time and I was talking to the director of a hospital, and he came by our booth And I was talking to him, and I asked him about his PDFs. You know, does the hospital use PDFs? He says, sure. And I said, are they accessible? And he said, well, I can find them whenever I need them. But of course, that's not necessarily the accessibility we're talking about, right? It's, can everybody read them, right? Including people who are blind or visually impaired or have other disabilities. Because as it states on the slide here, disability is part of the human condition, and sooner or later, probably everybody's going to have to deal with some kind of disability, whether it's temporary or permanent. So accessibility is really an important thing. And, you know, of course, there's laws and regulations and so on that require compliance with accessibility and standards. But often we're asked, you know, how compliant do I have to be? How close is close enough, right? So if you think about this scenario, somebody's in a wheelchair and they're trying to get into the building and they get 60, 70, even 90% of the way up the ramp. If they can't get all the way in the building, they're not in the building, right? And as such, you know, whoever owns that business or owns the building or whatever is, you know, possibly at risk for, you know, not being ADA compliant, right? The same is true with your websites, and we've seen a lot of, you know, website lawsuits happening in the recent years. But also, same applies to the documents that are on your website, right? So it's really important that we achieve 100% compliance so that everybody can get all of the access and all of the information that they need. Now, there are some similarities between PDF accessibility and HTML, right? So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, originally developed for websites, and web accessibility applies really well to PDF. So the nice thing about that when it comes to PDF accessibility is you don't have to necessarily learn a whole new standard, right? Of course, as we're talking about things today, what can you fix or what can you address in your documents? A lot of the things that I'm going to talk about can be dealt with and addressed from a document creation standpoint, and not waiting until the document is created and then have to go fix things. It's always going to be better, faster, cheaper, less frustrating to take a proactive approach and create your content with accessibility in mind instead of having to fix things after the fact. So what are the things that we can keep in mind while we're putting together our documents, right? We're going to talk about things like color use and contrast, how to handle images, and so on through the document. Here's just a quick list, but we're going to touch on each of these as we continue on with our time together. First is the color use, right? So the general guideline is don't use color as the only way of conveying information. Of course, I like to refer to, or I think of the color checkpoint kind of as an umbrella, because while the rule says don't use color as the only way of conveying information, it also says don't use other visual cues like font or font change or underlines or struck through or location on the page, right, as the only way of conveying information. Right? This is not only for people who are colorblind, for example, but when somebody is using a screen reader or other assistive technology, that assistive technology is not going to tell somebody when it's reading from a right sidebar, right? And if the document says all definitions are in the right sidebar, somebody using a screen reader wouldn't necessarily know that that's where it's reading from. At a particular time. So don't use visual cues as the only way of conveying important information. Now, along with color is contrast, right? We want to make sure that there's sufficient contrast with your content on the page so that people who are visually impaired, people who are colorblind can see adequately, you know, the information that you're trying to convey, right? So in WCAG 2.0, there's a requirement for regular sized text and images of text to have a contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1. And then there's a contrast ratio for large text of 3 to 1. Now you might be wondering what makes something, you know, regular sized text, if you will, or large text. So regular sized text is anything that's below 14-point font and bold, or 18-point font. So large text then is the combination of 14-point font and bold, or not bold 18-point font, right? That would be your large text. Now in WCAG 2.1, there's a contrast ratio requirement for graphics and adjacent content as well. And that contrast ratio is 3:1. Of course, how are you supposed to know? Use a contrast checker, right? And Moncito has one that they make freely available, that's easy to use, and you can check and see, make sure that the contrast between foreground and background, your images and adjacent content, make sure that you're all set in those regards. Next, we'll talk about briefly images and alternative text. So in a PDF, any image that contains important information needs to be tagged in a figure tag, and that figure tag needs to have alternative text, right? Very similar to a website. Images on web pages need to have alternative text. They do in PDFs as well. Basically, what it comes down to when you're trying to figure out your alternative text is, as the author, as the subject matter expert, what is that graphic being used to convey, right? What's important about that? You want to keep your alternative text short, but you want to keep it accurate and sufficiently informative, right? A couple other things to keep in mind when it comes to images. Not every image, of course, conveys important information. Sometimes they're just decorative. In a PDF, you place your decorative images in an artifact container, not in an artifact tag, right? Now, we see all kinds of things come along, but with the current PDF standard, we're going to use the artifact container and not tag decorative images, right? So just to take a step to the side for a second, talk about tagging a little bit. When somebody is using a screen reader, for example, to read a PDF, that screen reader isn't actually looking at the screen to read the content. It's reading from the tags, kind of behind the scenes layer in the PDF, if you will. So if the screen reader is reading from the tags, figure tags with alternative text, somebody's going to know what a particular graphic is being used to convey. And if something's not tagged, a decorative image, for example, then it's not wasting somebody's time with information that isn't really important. Also important to note that how you handle decorative images in PDF is different from how you handle them in HTML, right? In HTML, you leave the empty alt text, but in PDF, you would untag that image, again, placing it in an artifact container. So let's talk a little bit more about tags. It's important to know, first of all, that the presence of tags in a PDF is just the bare minimum, right? You cannot just add tags to a document or check to make sure that they're there and just assume that, yep, we're good to go, right? There's oftentimes a lot of verification and there's a lot of remediation work or fixing that needs to happen as well. Heading tags are important in documents because they provide information like hierarchical information, relationships between sections and subsections, and so on. And also for screen reader users, for example, heading tags are really crucial for navigation, for finding your way through the document faster, right? You can actually navigate to your various headings in a document, skipping a bunch of information, for example, that you might not care about, to kind of fast forward to the section of the document that you do care about. In addition, there's other tags, obviously, in a PDF besides just headings. There's paragraphs, lists, tables, and so on. So they provide additional structural information. And when it comes to lists and tables, for example, a screen reader user will be told that there's a list that they're about to be read and how long it is, and the screen reader will read through it and tell the user that they're out of the list when it's done, and so on. So it's important that not only are there tags in the document, but the proper tags are being used for the content. And of course, there's rules for how some of those tags get assembled and so on as well. Also, the nice thing about tags, it allows for additional information to be added to the document that is necessary. For example, as I mentioned with images, alternative text. If you have sections of your document that are in various languages, you can easily change the language of the sections just by changing the language that's assigned to those tags, for example. So again, the presence of tags is just the bare minimum, but you need to check some of these other things as well. So one thing that comes up often in PDF accessibility is making sure that with those tags that a screen reader is reading the content in the correct order. So what is the reading order in a PDF? It's determined by the order of the tags in the tags tree, because again, that's where assistive technology is reading from. Now, there is a common misconception or a common misunderstanding that the order panel in Acrobat sets the reading order for assistive technology. And long story short, that is in fact not the case. We actually did a longer webinar on this earlier this spring, and we'll provide our contact information later if you would like to have access to that recorded webinar. We can go a little bit more in depth as to what the reading order is. But long story short, in a PDF, the reading order is determined by the order of the tags in the tags tree. Hyperlinks is another thing that is pretty easy to take care of issues that might possibly come up. First of all, you want to make sure that you're using good link authoring, right? WCAG, to paraphrase, basically says you ought to be able to read just the hyperlinked text and know where that link is going to take you or what it's going to do, right? So in fact, screen reader users, as they're going through a web page or through a PDF, can bring up a list of just the links in the document. And so if you're listening out of context to just a list of links and all you hear is here, click here, more, link, you have no idea where that's going to take you. Similarly, if all you're listening to is a really long URL, that can be equally confusing and unhelpful. So use good link authoring so that somebody knows when I follow that link, it's going to take me there, wherever there might be, right? Also, when it comes to the tagging of links, they've got to be tagged correctly. We're not going to get into all of the technical details of how to tag things in today's webinar. We just don't have the time for that. But it's important that the links are tagged correctly and that they have alternative text, right? Also, in PDFs, the tab order needs to be set to follow the document structure. Now, what that means is that as somebody is navigating through the document, hitting the tab key, it needs to follow the same order that the tags are in, right? The tags, as we just briefly talked about, that's technically known as the document structure. So the tag tree is the same thing. Similarly with forms in PDF, right, and we deal a lot with forms in PDFs as well as HTML. You want to design your forms to be fill then print, right? What that means is make it so that somebody can fill it out electronically and then print it out if they need to mail it in somewhere, for example, right? But if somebody has to print out a form first and then fill it out, obviously there's going to be some accessibility issues in there for people who are blind or people who are visually impaired, or maybe even with motor difficulties and so on, you have a hard time holding a pen to fill out a form, right? When it comes to electronic forms, tooltips need to be present and need to be sufficiently descriptive so that somebody knows what the question is. When a screen reader lands on a form field, it's going to read the tooltip to somebody. That's basically the question, so that somebody knows what they need to, what they need to put into the text field, for example. In WCAG 2.1, they kind of tightened the rule up a little bit, made it a little bit more rigorous, and the field names, the form field names, and their text labels should match, right? So if the question that you're looking at visually on the page says first name, the field name should be first name as well, so that they match instead of just text box 1, for example. When you're creating your documents, certainly before you make them available to other people, you need to make sure things like validation rules, required fields have been set up correctly, right? So that if you're designing a form and you want somebody to answer this question, you've got to set it up so that it behaves as a required field, right? And of course, as with other things mentioned in the PDF, they need to be tagged correctly. And just like with links, the tab order needs to be set to follow the tag tree. And as mentioned before, keyboard functionality is really crucial because not everybody's using a pen or a pencil to fill out a form. Again, you've got to be able to fill it out electronically. And along those lines, not everybody is using a mouse, right? So keyboard accessibility, keyboard functionality is important when reading and navigating through and using PDFs, just like it is for websites, right? People with physical disabilities, people with an injury, maybe just personal preference. People don't always use the keyboard, right? In fact, I haven't, or people don't always use the mouse. I haven't touched my mouse for this whole presentation. I've just been using my keyboard to advance the slides, for example. Now, the nice thing about PDF accessibility and keyboard functionality and so on is that generally speaking, the PDF processors and so on that are available, keyboard accessibility is not really that much of an issue as long as the PDF is tagged correctly so that you get that navigation functionality and so on. With the exception, as I mentioned, with links and forms, making sure that their tab order is set correctly as well. Finally, tables, right? Everybody loves a good table in their documents or probably on their websites as well. We want to make sure that in PDF you're only using tables for data and not just for layout in your document, right? Lots of times people will put a table into the document just to help line things up on the page, and then they'll hide the lines so that it doesn't really look like a table. But the problem with that is that for somebody who's using a screen reader, as it's reading through the tags, they're going to be told there's a table where there's not really a table, right? So instead, we would want to just provide the text as it is in paragraphs or images and figure tags, for example, as needed. However, if you do have data tables, you need to make sure that, that the header cells, the column headers and the row headers, for example, are tagged as header cells, TH, table header, and also they have the proper scope assigned to them, either column or row. Right now, complex tables, again, we don't have a whole lot of time to get into everything that can go wrong in a table, but suffice it to say, complex tables often require some additional work to make sure that the data cells are being associated to the correct headers as a screen reader is reading through a table and as somebody is navigating through the table as well. So that's kind of maybe a whole lot to take in, and maybe you're thinking, well, gee, what do I do now? How do I even know what problems I have, or what do we do to fix them? So I'm going to hand it back over to Sterling, and he's going to tell you all about how Moncito can help.
Yes, great. Thank you, Paul. Sterling here from Moncito for anyone I've not spoken with yet before. And so to tie a lot of these things in together, Common Look and Moncito have joined forces a few years ago to complete our accessibility and compliance testing offering. So I'm going to begin sharing my screen here with everyone. Hopefully we can see this all right. And so I understand some of the folks in the meeting might be Moncito customers, some of you might not. If you aren't familiar with our service, we are a website and web monitoring provider. And in our accessibility module and section, we have built an entire PDF opportunity and section for everybody to provide accessibility scanning and remediation for your PDFs and documents. So if you are familiar with the Moncito platform, in the accessibility module, there is the PDF section on the left-hand side of the menu, which we will first break apart your internal and external PDFs, just so you could get a quick understanding of what types of PDFs are present on your website. And towards the top, we have a tracking system to help everyone stay organized. And so whether the PDFs are pending, reviewed and passed the scan, currently in the queue, or have failed the accessibility scan, will help you understand the status of each individual file. And as we scroll down here towards the bottom, you will have the opportunity to see a list of your PDFs and some general information that has been provided through our integration with Clarity. If you're not familiar, Clarity is the PDF scanning tool that CommonLook provides, and what it helps do is scan all of your PDFs and helps you prioritize them from the get-go. And so in our platform in general, if you would want to scan any of your PDFs to get an understanding of the status, you can select all. You could come here and select individual ones, and then hit our action item on the right-hand side to either request a Clarity scan directly from CommonLook. Once the scan is complete, there will be a report generated. These ones haven't been scanned as of yet, but this is our version of the report where you can see the types of checks that were presented, and then if they were flagged or failed on the right-hand side. Now, that's going to be a nice route for you to begin your internal route to fixing the PDFs. So if this is something you wanted to do in-house, this would be a great starting point. If you feel, at times that, maybe you don't have the time or the staff or the resources to remediate your PDFs internally, we have also created an opportunity for you to request remediation straight from CommonLook themselves. And you can do the same exact thing by selecting individual PDFs, maybe by the date created, or if you use our analytics module, we do track all of the document downloads, so you can really stay organized and have a prioritized list of which PDFs are more important than the next. Naturally, if PDFs are used every single day, 100 times a day, and downloaded by your community, those would be a little bit higher on the list of things to get done first. And so what a lot of our clients like to do, and they enjoy using, is maybe starting there, seeing which PDFs are used more than others, and then requesting a quote to see how much CommonLook would actually, what the cost would be for them to fix the PDFs themselves. To talk to you a little bit about the workflow, whatever user submitted this request within a few days would receive the quote in their inbox, and essentially from there you can say yay or nay. If you do move forward with the remediation, you will then be working directly with CommonLook, and they will send you all the ins and outs of the levels of accessibility they'll be performing, which by default PDF UA. Within, there's a time frame that they provide to you, depending on the number of PDFs, of course. They will email you the finished products. You will have the ability to then re-upload them back to your site and then move them to the reviewed and passed section. Through our weekly and ongoing scanning of all of your documents and PDFs, if we notice any change on that PDF, maybe somebody went in and updated an alt tag or added a new piece of content to that PDF, we will automatically move it back to the pending section, essentially telling you, hey, we noticed there's new content or something's been changed on the PDF. We're going to suggest for you to run another clarity check and see what new information was found. So these two opportunities are really designed to help, both scenarios, whether you wanted to fix these internally or outsource some of the work and alleviate some of the workload to CommonLook. That is all available there for you. But aside from that, I'm going to hand it off to Chad or maybe Paul first to answer some questions, and then talk to you a little bit more about some of the services that would come included from CommonLook and Monsito's integration.
All right, thanks for that, Sterling. This is Chad Zaire, account executive here at CommonLook. I hope everyone is doing well today. So we're going to talk about other remediation options. So I'm going to do just a quick rundown on our remediation through our leadership and our process, and then also talk about some of our products. CommonLook's approach is that we like to provide clients with a wide range of options, whether that's providing you the software to do it yourself in-house, or the remediation services to completely alleviate the pain or extra work, what have you, of doing this yourself, or to do both and take the hybrid approach. So industry leadership in our process, what does that mean? So CommonLook has over 20 years of proven process and our technology. So this translates into our remediation work and our software. We remediate documents over a wide range of industries, around 10,000 pages monthly. So every document that you send to us, our remediation team will do a full evaluation of those documents. Once you approve to have those documents remediated by us, your final document, once delivered, will come with a full guarantee according to which standard you choose, and also a full compliance report. Thanks, Paul. Next. All right, so this is a look at our tools. All right, so we have our Clarity tool up first. Clarity is basically our evaluation tool. With your HTML provided, Clarity will provide a full review of all of your PDF documents on your web page. Basically, this is an in-depth scan. You can set it up to scan by standard, or you can run it against all the standards. It will give you a full list of all the PDFs existing on your site, even PDFs that you didn't know you had, in order for you to fully evaluate your situation to see where you stand. This can be a fully customizable service, or it can be a one-time scan. So what that means is you can set this up to where it can scan monthly, quarterly, even yearly, depending upon how often you're uploading content to your web page. Next up, we have CommonLook Office. CommonLook Office, this is our easiest tool with the shortest learning curve. When we talk about automation, this tool has a lot of automation baked into the development of the tool. Basically, you're able to make PDFs accessible directly from Microsoft Word and PowerPoint. Okay, so basically the Office tool is doing the heavy lifting for you with all of the automation that's in the tool for the majority of your tasks. So you get things such as style mapping, table formatting. Office takes you step by step through the document until converting to a compliant PDF in the end. Next up, we have our PDF tool. This is our flagship tool. There's a bit of a learning curve here, but back again to automation, CommonLook PDF automatically detects and repairs a variety of PDF issues and problems, basically assisting users while fixing all the others. Okay, it also alerts users to correct structuring of tables, lists, and also your table of contents. One of my favorite features, and most notable by our clients, is the back or undo feature, or back button. So basically you can go back step by step until you're last saved if you make an error while working on a document. And something else that Paul touched on earlier, the keyboard shortcuts. This is critical to cutting down the amount of time that it takes to remediate a document in PDF because of the keyboard shortcuts. So you can easily create, convert, move tags, level up, copy and cut and paste, and also change reading order. Okay, and last up we have our PDF validator tool. This is a free tool that's available at commonlook.com. Essentially, the PDF validator is kind of the Diet Coke version of Clarity. All right, so you're testing and validating your documents against the standards. This is the only checker to test against Section 508, WCAG 2.0 AA, PDF UA, and HHS standards. And once again, this is free at commonlook.com. You just visit our website and you can download the validator tool after filling out the questionnaire. Next, Paul. All right, and without any more further ado, I'm going to pass it back over to Paul Reyes.
Thanks, Chad. Thanks, Sterling. So thanks everybody for tuning in. I do see that some questions have shown up in the Q&A pod. So we'll go ahead and check those out now. I'll go ahead and read through them, and I'll answer the PDF ones and so on, and I'll hand over to Sterling any of the maybe Moncito HTML type of questions. So first question here, are there character limitations to the alt text information? Good question. No, there actually are not character limitations to the alternative text in a PDF. However, there are limitations on how successfully screen readers will handle really long alternative text, right? So the standard doesn't say you're only allowed to have so many characters, but that's why when I was talking about alternative text for images, for example, keep it short, but make sure that it's accurate, right? Because again, if the alternative text is too long, some screen readers will have a hard time with that. Okay, so I guess this is a continuation of the first question, such as a one-page photocopy. So when it comes to a scanned document, the first thing you're going to need to do with that is you're going to want to run OCR, which stands for Optical Character Recognition. That takes the picture of your page and converts it to searchable text, right? Which, among other things, if there's searchable text, it's also taggable, right? So that we can tag our headings and our paragraphs and our lists and so on as needed. Because the only other option would be to put the entire page in a figure tag, and then you would essentially have to write out the entire contents of the page and its structure into the alternative text. And that would certainly be too heavy for a screen reader to read. How do you carry screen tips from Word to the PDF in hyperlinks? That's a great question, and it actually touches on one of the shortcomings in Word, right? You actually can't. That's the screen tips in Word don't become the alternative text for links in a PDF. However, Chad did mention Common Look Office, and that's one of the things that Common Look Office does is to help you provide alternative text for your links coming from Word and PowerPoint. Next question, if you're adding a tooltip, why does the field name need to be changed? Do screen readers read field names on forms? Sorry, I got a call when you went over this. That's a great question. Long story short, that's a WCAG requirement that the field names and the text labels match, or at least are sufficiently close enough that they're obviously relatable to each other, right? First name and first name, as opposed to first name and text field 1, right? So different screen readers may do different things with them and so on, but long story short, that's a WCAG requirement that your forms are set up that way. How do you assign cells as table headers in complex tables where they span multiple columns? Well, in Common Look, it's really pretty easy. You make sure that the cell span is correct, first of all, and then you can easily convert tags to TH from TD as needed for table headers, and then it's just assigning the scope, which again is pretty easy to do as well. You can assign scope in Acrobat, for example, as well. Can you describe what a tooltip is? Sure. A tooltip gets assigned to a form annotation or a widget annotation in the PDF. And so there's various screen reader modes. They're called different things depending on the screen readers, but there's reading mode or sometimes browse mode. And then there's forms mode or sometimes called focus mode. So when somebody's in focus mode, that's the mode that they would be able to fill out a form. Right, so if I'm in browse mode, for example, and I hit an H on my keyboard, it's going to take me to the next heading in the document. If I'm in forms mode or focus mode and I hit an H, it's going to tell me I typed the letter H. Okay, so the functionality is different, but when you're reading through a PDF that has forms in it and you're in forms mode or focus mode, the only thing that gets read are the tooltips. Right? So that's how somebody knows what the question is that they're being asked to answer. The screen reader will land on a text field, for example. It'll read the tooltip and say edit, which means that that's an editable text field, for example. I tried an accessibility test with Common Look plugin and it skipped some table tests. Any idea why? Not without looking at your document, but there is, in fact, contact information up on the screen. So please feel free to reach out to Chad, send him this question, maybe send him the document, right? And we can check it out. But if it skips some tests, maybe it's because Common Look automatically detected that there weren't any issues with the table, or you know, there could be other reasons as well, right? Again, reach out to us so we can look at your specific situation and provide a little bit more clear of an answer. Sorry, I can't do that here. That does look like it's actually all of the questions in the Q&A pod. We'll leave it open for a couple more minutes if people are frantically typing to try to get their question in now. Or, if you think of a question after the fact, please feel free to reach out to Chad and Sterling. Send us your questions, and if it's a Moncito HTML question, then Sterling will get your answer. If it's a PDF question, then Chad will get you your answer, and we will follow up with you. Thank you very much for attending today's webinar. I don't see any more questions showing up in the pod. So again, thanks for your time, and hopefully this was helpful and informative. And again, we will be sending you the captioned recording. Please give us a few days or so to get the captioning done. You can maybe imagine now that there's a little bit of a backlog on some captioning services given the current day and age. But we will get that to you, so be on the lookout for it. Maybe check your junk email folder as well, just to make sure that it didn't end up there. But again, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Thanks for your time, and feel free to reach out to us and let us know how we can help you with your website and PDF accessibility needs. Thanks, everybody. Take care.